desperately need more women, more people of color, more underrepresented groups in our innovation economy.
Well, good afternoon to everyone, and welcome to today's Elevating Conversations presented by AnitaB.org. I'm your host today, Brenda Darden Wilkerson, President and CEO of AnitaB.org. I'm going to pause and just provide a visual description of myself for any of our visually impaired audience. I'm a brown-skinned woman with dark brown hair. Today I'm wearing purple and gray. Before we get started, here's an important accessibility tip. Automated captioning is available for this session. To turn this on, please click on the closed captioning icon located at the bottom of your Zoom screen and select Show Subtitles. Our Illuminating Conversation series addresses current industry trends and the most pressing issues facing women and non-binary technologists and the innovation ecosystem. Our series aims to bring together tech leaders and experts to discuss how to lead and navigate challenges and opportunities in today's tech environment. Now, we want this to be a lively session, so let us know where you're tuning in from in the chat. I'm currently in San Mateo, California, and we're looking forward to finding out where everybody else is coming in from. So welcome from India, from Virginia, Tampa, Florida. Welcome Seattle, San Juan, Puerto Rico. Wow. Colorado Springs, Alabama, Minneapolis, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, Northeast England. Wow, this is exciting. Welcome everyone, and we're just excited to have you all here today at whatever time of day or night it is. So today we'll hear from an esteemed group of powerful women who will speak on their experiences dealing with employment rights and equal pay. We'll hear about tech corporations that have been proactive in addressing pay inequity and learn more about the increasing number of states enacting pay transparency protections for workers. Our panelists will also present examples of best practices in this area and discuss how pay transparency protocols have positively impacted the retention of tech talent. Now, we always talk about Equal Pay Day, and this year it fell on March 15 for white women, the earliest we have ever marked the occasion according to the Biden administration. Now, the earlier that Equal Pay Day arrives, the closer our nation comes to achieving pay fairness. However, this means, March 15 means that they must work an extra 3.5 months to catch up to what white men earned in the previous 12 months. For women of color, these stats are far worse. Equal Pay Day for Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander women doesn't come until May 3rd. Black women's Equal Pay Day will fall on September 21st of this year. and Native American and Latino women will have to wait until the last 2 months of the year. Now, I think we can all agree that it is time to end the gender pay gap for all women, making December 31st equal pay for all every year. After today's conversation, please be sure to check out our membership page for salary negotiation tips so that you can better advocate for yourself in your workplace. We'll also have a Q&A session at the end of the conversation. If you have a question, please pop it into our Q&A feature. We encourage you to engage with us using the chat feature throughout today's conversation. AnitaB.org team members will also be active in the chat, replying to your comments and sharing additional resources. Now, if anything resonates with you today, we encourage you to use the hashtag AnitaBElevates to share those brilliant gems on social media. And with that, please join me in welcoming our distinguished panelists. First, we have Monique L. Thompson, a leader in technology for over 30 years who identifies as a Black female and who amicably settled a tech lawsuit 20 years ago via her legal representation, Cohen Milstein. During her tenure, she has been leaving her impact at Fortune 500 companies, creating and launching products, implementing new marketing strategies, and developing new lines of business. Monique is a pioneer in the long-fought battle to eliminate the disparity and equity Black people and women face in technology today. She is also an author, professional life coach, and certified Myers-Briggs practitioner. Welcome, Monique. Now we have Christine E. Weber, co-chair of Cohen Milstein's Civil Rights and Employment Practice and a nationally acclaimed employment and civil rights litigator. Ms. Weber is one of the country's leading voices on employment discrimination, wage and hour, class and collective actions, and cutting-edge civil rights issues related to artificial intelligence. Ms. Weber has litigated some of the most significant employment class and collective actions in recent U.S. history, including Dukes versus Walmart and Tyson's Foods for violations of the Fair Labor Standards Act. Welcome, Christine. And our third distinguished and honored guest and featured panelist is Dr. Anita F. Hill. Dr. Hill is a university professor of social policy, law, and women's studies at Brandeis University and chair of the Hollywood Commission for Eliminating Sexual Harassment and Advancing Equality. Dr. Hill graduated from Oklahoma State University and received her JD from Yale Law School. Starting her career in Washington, D.C., she worked in private practice and at the Education Department and Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. In 1989, Dr. Hill was the first African-American professor tenured at the University of Oklahoma College of Law. In addition to teaching, Dr. Hill serves on the boards of several nonprofit organizations, has authored various publications, offered television and radio commentary, presented to hundreds of audiences around the globe, and served as counsel to the law firm of Cohen, Milstein, Sellers, and Toll, where she advised on class action discrimination cases. Welcome, Dr. Hill. Well, I'm excited. I'm so excited to see everyone here, and I'm ready to jump into this great conversation. But I'd like to start today's discussion by doing a bit of level setting. We know that pay comes in at many different points through a person's employment, not just in the hiring practice. Recent analysis from the AnitaB.org 2021 Top Companies report found that women in tech have been promoted at higher rates than men for the last several years. Now, while this is a positive trend and it remained true in 2021, the difference in promotion rates narrowed, meaning that men's promotion rates had increased relative to women's. Therefore, women's advancement and pay remained stagnant, and this is especially true for women of color. This shows us that pay discrimination can surface in many different scenarios, not just hiring. So, Christine, I want to start with you. How do we define pay disparity?
Well, when you hear things like women make 83 cents on the dollar, that's looking at all full-time working women compared to full-time working men. And it captures differences due to occupational segregation, where women are pushed into lower paying jobs, as well as differences in pay within the same job. But even if you look at what the law would recognize as unequal pay, as a violation of equal pay laws, where you have the same employer, a similar job, we still see pervasively that men are paid more than women. But the disparities are smaller in size, usually closer to 5 to 10% differences in salary, obviously depending on geographic market and specific employer, and also varying based on race, so that white women might see pay disparities closer to 5%. Black and Latino women may see more like a 10% pay disparity. And of course, when you add in differences in bonus or stock options, disparities can be even more significant.
Well, thank you for that. And so now that we have a better understanding of the term, how can we identify it? And what do we do? What do we know about its prevalence?
Well, as I said, highly prevalent. Some recent studies showed that at time of hire, 59% of men were offered higher pay than women being hired into the same job title at the same company. So certainly it's happening more often than not. And as you mentioned earlier, it's not just at time of hire. When there's annual pay raises, at the time of promotion, anytime pay is being adjusted, we can see larger adjustments for men than for women. So it's really the cumulative effect in which we see both differences at the time of hire and then increasing differences over time. So it's really something women have to be on the lookout for, starting with, talking to their coworkers to find out, to the extent they can, how their pay compares to their peers.
Thanks. Dr. Hill, you are an expert in perseverance and have overcome obstacles under public scrutiny. Talk to us about your journey and any issues that you may have witnessed throughout your tenure in higher education.
Well, perseverance for me is an act of resistance. And sometimes I think in my case and in the case of others who probably experience it, just showing up is an act of resistance. But some resistance has to be more proactive. So for me, when I think about what I do to stay in the game, if you will, I try to remain relevant and knowledgeable and really up to date. I've made a point of being engaged, remaining engaged. When I joined the Cohen Milstein firm, it was because I had been in teaching for years, and I decided that I really needed to know what was going on outside of the classroom, how things were changing and what needed to happen to allow them to continue to change through litigation. And class action litigation was really an important area for me, because it raises the point of how do we then overcome obstacles? Is it better to overcome obstacles on an individual by individual case or practice, or is it more effective or more efficient maybe to engage in change that involves large numbers of parties? You ask about both obstacles and perseverance, and I think of perseverance really as problem solving. Overcoming obstacles is problem solving. Perseverance can just sort of be making sure you get your point across, making sure you advance, making sure you move forward. But there's another element that is about how do you address the things that are holding you back? And that's what overcoming obstacles is about. And there's so many ways to do it, but it happens in different ways in different circumstances. But I think key to being able to overcome obstacles is knowing what your organization's systems are, understanding the culture of your organization, as well as understanding what the organization's institutional values are. I've done things like go through informal channels to fix problems, to solve problems. But I have found that that informal channels are quite limited in terms of what you can achieve. So, there are formal processes that you can go through. You can go through as an individual, you can go through as part of a group. I've actually taken on a leadership role in order to deal with some of what I saw as the institutional obstacles at Brandeis University when it came to issues around sexual assault and rape and on college campuses, when it came to issues of diversity and inclusion, and even on the issues of on the issue of equal pay. One of the things that I did was sort of a combination of going through trying to change internal policy through a group. Was when I accomplished when I had taken on a position in the administration in addition to my teaching. And as part of the Women's and Gender Studies Department, we collected information about what the pay rates were for female faculty at every level, and posted this information on posters throughout the university. So we did a kind of a combination of activism and advocacy and informal as well as formal. And I felt very good about being able to help provide that information. But, sometimes internal processes don't work. We know that they can fail because the structures are put in place to keep them from succeeding. We know that it's sometimes hard to get leadership buy-in. And even sometimes when you get the leadership buy-in, your solutions may take a long time to actually be implemented. So, for me, as a lawyer, now sort of putting on the other part of what I do for external processes are sometimes the only way to go if the internal processes and the internal remedies aren't forthcoming. And that means a whole range of behaviors too. And I've witnessed all of them and experienced some of them. So one internal remedy is just resigning a place that is not treating you fairly. Resigning and suing or not suing. We can advocate for policy through legislation. I'm doing some of that informally, not, we don't do lobbying, directly in the Hollywood Commission, but we are advocating for policy changes in the organizations we deal with, in the entertainment industry, by promoting really the positive policies that need to be in place to deal with harassment, to deal with equal pay and other kinds of discrimination. And of course, there's always suing individually as a member of a class or as an individual. And there are risks to all of these, and we can talk about what the risks are, and what you do, what anyone does really depends on their tolerance, their risk tolerance. I'm very fortunate, for all of the things that I pushed on, I felt I had some security because I was tenured at the University of Oklahoma. I'm tenured now. I had some security because I didn't have children and a family to support. Mm-hmm. So that risk wasn't there that, if I was going to starve, I was going to starve alone. And I had a sister who told me she'd feed me. So I at least didn't worry about starving. But I think that if your priority is to have monetary relief, if that is your priority, then looking outside of your organization is a way to, and suing, filing suits or filing formal complaints is probably your best option. But it doesn't mean it's the only option. It just means it can be the best option depending on the circumstances that you're offering or that you're under, including whether or not you feel that there's some kind of safety net for you in terms of being able financially and emotionally to move forward.
Thank you for that. It's good to know. I know many people will say that they just don't know what their options are. And so this discussion is so important so that people understand the different layers of relief that they could seek. So thanks. So Monique, it's awe-inspiring to see what you were able to accomplish in your thriving 30-year career in the tech industry after the lawsuit many years ago. How did you manage to move forward from that moment? And what has your support system looked like over the years?
Thank you, Brenda. I think, first of all, for me moving forward, I don't think there was ever a stop kind of in momentum. The focus was always on equality, right? And ensuring that there is fairness. And I know what you mean by moving forward as far as, kind of in my tech career. Was it scary at the time? Absolutely, yes, it was. I did have, a family and children and things like that. But I think moving forward for me was knowing the value that I still was able to bring to the table to tech companies, understanding that I still had that place and felt that I had a place in fighting for it. And that one of my perspectives was if a company did not want to hire me because of that, it probably wasn't a company I wanted to work at in the first place. Right? And pursued and looked at companies that were focused on, at least an understanding of the fact that there is, a pay gap and disparity when it comes to women and particularly to Black women. I would say that in that there were times where maybe I may have thought, I wonder if I did not get that interview or that role because of that, or things like that. But I would say ultimately moving forward, it was really also leaning into my community. And one of the things that happened as a result of those things was that we opened up a conversation that was previously forbidden and taboo. Something that we thought, something that we already knew in our hearts was true, was the fact that there was a significant disparity with women and with Black women in technology when it comes to pay, but we didn't talk about it. This was 22 years ago. And so today we have, Women's Equal Pay Day. We have Black Women's Equal Pay Day, as you mentioned, which is later this year than it was last year, which last year it was August 3rd. This year it's September 24th. And, Black women make 57 cents to the dollar that male Caucasians make. And so we didn't have a lot of that data then, but what it enabled us to do was to open up a conversation. And really, I think one of the most freeing parts of it was, there were times when we had conversations and meetings and to look around in the room and to see other people who look just like me, to see other women, to see other individuals that had experienced some of those same challenges, and then to recognize we weren't alone. And I think that was one of the biggest things that was kind of the thing and the catalyst that caused me to continue to stand strong and to move forward, was understanding that there was a there. There is something here that is inherently, for lack of better terms, right, illegal, right? In the way that women have been paid in the disparity in pay based on all of our laws and things like that. We didn't have the social media and the content and the information we have today in order to be able to validate that. So being able to acknowledge and to see that there are others from, locally and across the United States that had experienced those same type of things, I think it built a sense of community, and it built a sense of kind of steadfastness in us that enabled us to say, I'm going to stand strong, and that what we are kind of illuminating and the information that we are providing is something that needs to be addressed. And I will say 22 years later, it's still not resolved, right? And so
Okay.
we can imagine, what that disparity, if we had the data and the metrics and numbers back then that we have now, what that disparity was then.
Right. I mean, and I think that's why we're having this conversation, right? And I think it's so important, as you said, that other people know that they're not alone, and that they, as all of the things that Dr. Hill shared, what their choices are and things that they have to consider in their own lives. But we have to have this discussion. We have to have it out in the open, because no, it's not fixed. And that's something that is really critical to the work that we do here at AnitaB.org, is to do all we can to help fix it. So, Christine, you represented Monique during her case 20 years ago. Now, 20 years later, we see places like New York, Massachusetts, California passing laws around pay protections. Talk to me about similarities or differences that you see as it relates to pay parity in these laws or these protections. And what does the law say about pay transparency in certain states?
Unfortunately, the similarity is that just we saw pay disparities 20 years ago, and we haven't eliminated them. So that we still see. The most recent stats I've seen in litigation in the past couple of years, where class actions were certified in California against Oracle, that was on evidence of a 13% pay disparity, according to the plaintiff's expert there. Google class action was also certified in California, similar magnitude. But what's different is that states, having seen how persistent pay inequity has been, and seeing that the federal government has not stepped in with additional help, many individual states have stepped forward and really shown great leadership in advancing equal pay. I'd prefer that the same advantages were available to everybody nationwide and not just in select states. But there's the first important wave of laws, which now covers about 20 or 21 different states, or laws that prohibit employers from asking you about your prior pay at your last job. We know this is still common, or people may try and do workarounds by asking about salary expectations, but in almost half the states, it is now illegal for an employer to say, well, what are you currently paid, or what were you paid at your last job, when they're deciding how much to offer you. And so that's important, because otherwise, it bakes in existing pay disparities, as employers tend to just offer something a little bit over what you're currently paid. And among the states that prohibit this practice, California, Washington State, Illinois, New York, Massachusetts, and many others. I want to single out California and Massachusetts in particular, because there, even if you volunteer the information about your prior pay to the employer is prohibited from considering that in setting your salary. And that helps, because otherwise, men or other people who are just higher paid would volunteer their past salary to use that for their leverage. And then anybody who stays silent, well, then the employer can guess that they're paid less. And so they just don't offer them as much in a new salary. So that has been one step forward, but that sort of comes at one side of the equation of what the employer knows about your pay. But it doesn't get at what you really need to know about, well, what does the employer pay other people? So some states are now requiring what we call pay transparency. And it takes a few different forms. In California, for example, if you've applied for a job, and I think if you get to the interview stage, then you can ask for and are entitled to receive information about what they're paying people for that job, what their pay range is. And then going further, Colorado, and now Washington State, well, the Washington State law effective January of next year, and New York City effective, I want to say this summer, all require that when a job is posted, whether it's internal or external, that come with a salary range attached, so that people, even before they apply for a job, would know what range of salary to expect. And that's not perfect. One thing I'm going to be watching as these new laws roll out is if employers start giving unreasonably wide ranges that don't tell you a whole lot. But it's definitely a big step forward. In the absence of those sorts of transparency requirements, women really end up depending upon their peers sharing information informally, I will also say, while employers like to discourage that, and many will tell you it's prohibited, that's really very strongly protected. Most states have some explicit protection saying you're allowed to share that information with your colleagues, and even federal law, excluding supervisors, but federal law under the National Labor Relations Act protects the right of employees to share with their coworkers discussions about, terms and conditions of employment, and so that includes what they're each being paid. So despite employer prohibitions, there is some federal protection, and in many states, much greater legal protection for those practices. And in addition to those sources, there are some websites. I think you mentioned some people resort to sort of Glassdoor. There's another one called payscale.com. I'm sure there's many others. And some may have better coverage of some industries than others, or some employers than others. So it may take some digging. But it's definitely worth pursuing, because the more knowledge you have about what's really going on, the more information you have to decide if you want to take action.
Yes, I think that was really important. I'm sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Monique.
Sorry, Brenda. I think we're probably going to see, Christine, I think that was a critical component of people understanding the freedom to be able to have those discussions about salary and the federal protection around it. I don't know. I know there's been some things and kind of surveys that have gone around on LinkedIn, and I don't know that there's still kind of a general awareness of the fact that it is illegal for an employer to cause any kind of retribution or anything for or to come back against an employee that shares that kind of information. And I don't think people know it, that it's been one of those kind of taboo subjects where people are concerned and afraid that they are actually breaking some kind of company rules, but there's a federal law that protects them. And I wanted to just kind of highlight that, because I know for me, the freedom to have the conversation is part of the battle. Right? The freedom to be able to talk about it, to be able to understand, particularly for underrepresented groups. When we talk about women and we talk about Black women who don't often have the access and the resources to be able to gain that information from others, building that community to be able to share, and knowing that it's okay, and level setting that sharing is, knowledge is power, and having that knowledge can enhance not only your career, but others in a sense of community.
And I just wanted to add to that too. It's in the hiring practice. I have experienced recently employers asking what the prior salary was. And so, that's something that has been set aside for quite some time. But if we don't know that, and if we're intimidated and feel like we have to, it puts you at a disadvantage, especially for women and for women of color. So knowledge is power, and being part of a community where you're talking to others who are going through these same things is really, really important. So thank you for all of that information. And I'm hoping everybody is soaking this all up. Dr. Hill, you've shared that you continue to work and advocate for advancing equality, particularly for women. Can you share in what ways do you think women should advocate, and maybe additional ways in their states to address these issues, or what types of policies should they be pushing for?
Yeah, advocating for policy in today's political climate is really, I won't say it's risky, but I think there's so much confidence lacking in our political procedures that many people just don't want to undertake it because they don't believe that things can happen. But as Christine mentioned, there has been quite a bit of change on issues like salary history legislation. There also has been some change on non-disclosure agreements. So advocating is still an option. Advocating for policy change at the state and federal level is still an option. I would recommend that if you are going to undertake that kind of advocacy, that you go through or work with an organization that is involved. Advocacy is very hard organizational advocacy can help you by providing you with the kind of knowledge and training and understanding of what the political systems are that you're trying to engage. And so that would be for me the first start. But I would also suggest that there are ways that in organizations that are growing in number that will help people advocate for policy change within their own organizations, so that it's directly aimed at employers, so that there can be change. And we've seen a lot of activism, worker activism lately, and it seems to be a growing trend that can have an impact. If politics isn't your thing, and you don't trust the political systems, or you just don't want to engage in the political systems as they exist now, there are organizations that can help you advocate for change with your employers directly, or with groups of employers directly. So I think there are different options. And again, I think people have to find what is there, where they fit and what they think is most effective. The thing that when I was hearing both Monique and Christine talk was this, I kept thinking about the word transparency. One of the policies that I think that needs to be reinforced is the transparency politics and policies, because we've got all of you saying we didn't even know that this existed. We didn't know that. Most people don't know that there are protections out there, and that's not a problem. Necessarily a policy problem. That's a transparency problem within organizations. And so some of the policies that are out there that do exist now need to be bolstered through more demands for transparency and policies that make sure that there is transparency in terms of knowledge and information. We have, as I talked about the Hollywood Commission, one of the things that we are finding still, that even in this information era, that there are employees that just do not know what their rights are. And I, for one, don't believe it's an accident in many cases. I think it's deliberate. And perhaps employees will not do it unless they're forced by external factors or sources, or by internal factors or sources, to be open about what the protections are for workers. So, there's a whole range of ways to advocate. There's a range of ways to approach the issues in terms of advocating. So, but it all kind of starts with knowledge and information about how to move things.
Well, thank you for that. I'm going to throw this next question out to the group. What advice can you give to women and non-binary technologists that might be listening today to negotiate their salary during the hiring practice? Any tools that you might advise the viewers to use to start the conversation? Also, if they're already employed and they're looking for pay increases. So who'd like to start?
And the only thing I would say about that is to find out what somebody who is your peer in another organization is making. I mean, if that kind of knowledge, if there are pay issues within your organization, it may be across the board. But if you can find out what others outside who may be more satisfied with their pay are making, the kind of that you can at least begin to build a knowledge base, and that's a start.
I would say a couple of things. One, find out what the laws are for your state or the state's kind of headquarters of where your company is. For some states, during that hiring process at the time that they, and Christine, I'm stepping on your toes over here, but I'm giving a broad.
Go.
But for some states, when you are offered the position at that point, they may not offer you the pay band, but you have a right to ask what that pay band is at that time, right? So pay band, by what I mean is what is the range from the lowest end of the salary for that job and what's the highest end, to be able to provide you with that insight. So I think that's one. I agree with Dr. Hill. Use your community, use your network, continue to build a network, and use tools and platforms. There's a bunch of information that people have been sharing in the chat. LinkedIn has some comparative analysis. If you plus up for LinkedIn Premium, I'm not trying to plug any particular thing, Glassdoor, FYI Levels, and a lot of other ones, and Blind, all are kind of platforms that give you, and they're crowdsourced, meaning that people report their own kind of salary information. And then some are a little bit more kind of strategic about how they kind of calculate and then anticipate what some of the salaries are. And some of it is just raw reporting. Either way, data and information is your friend. And so how you gather it, whether it's via people or whether it's via tools, I think that's essential in being able to equip you and for everyone to be equipped and to be able to manage their career until, things change globally the way that they should be.
And I think those are excellent suggestions. The other couple things I would pass on are, if you're given a range, especially if it's a wide range, you might want to ask about some benchmarks, like how long does it typically take before people get to the midpoint of that range? Or if you're already employed and you're just trying to get your salary up to something that you would think is more equitable, you might ask during your review, well, what benchmarks do I need to meet to get my pay to, what I understand others in the organization are making? So you can try and get as much information from the employer as you can, even though not all states currently provide that legal entitlement. You can find a way to ask. I know that it is hard at times to get peers to share their salary information. One thing that sometimes help is if you volunteer your information as well, like make it clear that it's going to be an exchange and not just a one-way, give me information and I'm giving you nothing in return. And some organizations have even done sort of crowdsourcing things that try and attempt to anonymize, where you can just write down your race and gender and pay and your job grade or whatever the organization uses for giving some general categories, and sort of drop that anonymously in the box, and then that information can be assembled. So sometimes the people might be open to things like that, even if they're not open to just telling you flat out, this is what I make.
Yeah.
And some people just, they don't care to be helpful, but some people may also be embarrassed if they make more than you, that they know that they aren't worth more than you and yet are making more than you. And so, it may take some reassurance that, like, I'm not asking so that I can blame you because you didn't set your pay. I'm asking because the information could really be helpful in making sure that I do what I need to do to get my pay up to the right level. So it can take some finagling.
Excellent. Well, I just want to say really quickly, there's so much activity going on in the chat, and I'm really excited that everyone is engaging. So thank you. But Christine, I want to turn this a little bit on its ear. Can you paint a picture of the return on investment for organizations if they prioritize pay equity?
Well, sure. One good thing for organization is that they can avoid being sued, since there has been a lot of litigation lately. And so obviously organizations would like to avoid that. We have seen, and there's the best documented case I know of is that, rather than hide their heads in the sand, Salesforce, to give one example, actually decided to do a really rigorous pay audit of their own workforce, find out what pay inequities there were, and they committed at the outset to remedy those inequities. And they ended up spending a lot of, it was millions of dollars they spent equalizing pay, but certainly less costly than spending millions of dollars on legal fees fighting a lawsuit.
Right.
And you end up with, obviously a happier workforce that way. I haven't seen, specific, studies documenting the retention, but there certainly it's the case that I have seen studies that a common response to learning you're paid less than your peers is leaving an organization. And so if by companies, policing themselves, doing, really honest audits, not something that's designed as sort of window dressing, but something that really tries to get in and to the nitty gritty and find out what's really going on, then companies do have the opportunity to sort of clean their own house first. And that, would take away a major reason why people leave. And so, provides organizations the benefit of a more stable, longer lasting workforce.
Yeah.
And can I just add something quickly to that? A few years back, it's been now, I think since 2008, Frida Kapor-Klein did a book on giving notice about why people leave the workforce. And I think it's important for us to think about that in terms of the different demographics. And that's what she did. She broke it down into different demographics. Very high on everybody's list was pay equity. The reason they left because they didn't feel that they were getting paid fairly. But for people of color, even more important for an employer to respond to was the idea that they wanted to be recognized for their abilities. They wanted management to understand what they were worth and their value. People who identified as LGBTQ plus wanted better benefits. And it was both white males and female identified individuals who put pay at the top of their reason for leaving an organization, inability to get paid well. So I think for us, we should be looking at all of these issues from different perspectives. Everybody wants better pay, but sometimes the issues are cultural. Within organizations, and organizations need to understand that it's not just the pay with people, it is being respected and valued in your workplace for what your contributions are. And that's where we see the deviations between different groups. And I think that's important for us, for people to think about too, when they're asking for what they want and why it's not, these issues aren't being brought up in reviews, and they're not being brought up even in exit interviews.
I think that's so important. Thank you for mentioning that. It's critical. Well, I'm going to ask one more question before we go to Q&A, and it's for you, Monica. We know that organizations still have a long way to go. Obviously, we're having this conversation about having a fair and equitable environment. What are your thoughts about what can be done to change the reality of where we are and where we want to be?
Thank you, Brenda. I so agree with what Dr. Hill said regarding culture and values and that in an organization. Two things to that. One, I would say, there are people that are leaders within companies that do have the power to make change. I worked at one company where a new leader came in and she looked at the pay for the people in the organization. And she saw a kind of a systemic pay disparity between the women in her organization and the men in the organization. And she came in, and within the first 3 to 6 months of her being there, she level set it, right? She made it so that there was pay equity, and did that within in that department in that organization that she was working in. And so there is power. And if you don't have the ability to do that because of cultural structures and things like that, you can also, take your leadership and that influence and power you have as a leader to be able to drive change if you believe in that, right? My question is what leader wouldn't believe, or why would you not believe and wants to have pay equity? I think the other thing that I'll leave it with, Brenda, is this. My personal mantra is that a company goes through an exercise to determine the value that a particular job brings to that company, and they put a dollar amount to it. I don't think that people should be paid based on their ability to be a detective and a sleuth to try to figure out what that value is. I think that companies should just be transparent. They've already attributed a value to, regardless of who ends up filling that role, they have defined that this job has this range of value to the company associated with it. Then why not share it and pay people accordingly? That's my personal perspective. And it kind of dumbfounds me at times that it's come to this conversation of such complexity in the fact that it's already been predetermined what the value of that role and anyone filling that role is going to have is valued by how it's valued by the company. Why not share that? And then let people choose whether or not they feel like they want to participate and if that value is enough for them.
Yeah, so true. It just feels like a colossal change of habit. It needs to come over this practice. And the impact would be just huge. We could just talk about the impact of equal pay on our communities and our economy. That would be a whole nother conversation. I'm going to invite you all back for that. But just to running out of time, I want to go over and start with Q&A and get as many questions in as possible for the group. So Catherine Perito asked, last you checked, you needed to file a suit within 3 years of having been employed at a company. Has that changed at all?
So this is one where it really varies. If you're suing under Title VII, you don't have to file a suit in court right away, but you have to get to the EEOC almost always within 300 days. There are a small number of states where it's even shorter time, but it's not filing a whole lawsuit. It's just filing a charge with the EEOC. Under the Equal Pay Act, you can always have 2 years. For willful violations, you have 3 years. And then we get to every single state just about has their own Equal Pay Act or their own anti-discrimination law. And the statutes and limitations vary from, I think the range is from like 1 year to 6 years, depending on what state you're looking at. So I'm sorry not to be able to have a simple answer, but it really depends on what laws are going to apply to your particular employment situation as to how much time you have. It's not going to be a terribly long time. And certainly for Title VII protections, which is the broadest federal anti-discrimination law, it's a very short 300 days to get a charge on file with the EEOC.
Thank you. Here's a question. In many companies, a recruiter is sort of like the go-between, and will ask a question like, how much should I pay you? And at times you may state a range, and when you get onboarded into the company, this is all about what we've been talking about today, you find out that range is off and that you're being underpaid. How can a person who discovers this address such a case in that organization to get better pay?
I mean, you might start first when you're asked that question by the recruiter, how much should I pay you, by saying, you should pay me comparably with the way the company has valued the job and with what other people doing the job are paid. I need more information about the company's pay scales before I can give you a number. That's one way to start the conversation and see how much more information you can get. If you're already at the employer, then I think at least, bringing to, whether it's your manager, if there's somebody who's sort of a mentor or sponsor for you who might be willing to step in on something like this, to say like, I've learned that there's this pay disparity. This doesn't seem consistent with the way the company is paying other people. Like, what do I need to do to have somebody look at this and see what you can find out about the best approach for your particular company. But it's unfortunate that the burden ends up being on the employees to do what really, as Monique says, it's the manager's job to make sure their employees are being treated right. But not all managers take on that responsibility as seriously, and so there may be, other ways to get somebody to look at it.
Thank you. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. There are so many other questions, and thank you for sharing. I'd love to keep talking through these solutions, but unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. So Monique, Christine, Dr. Hill, thank you so much for such an open and thought-provoking conversation and for sharing your experiences with our audience. At AnitaB.org, we have made it our mission to ensure that women and non-binary technologists are seen, have a seat at the table within the technological sphere, but now it's time for these organizations to commit to paying us what we are worth. So thank you so much for being here today. If you could also just share one last gem that you'd like to leave with the audience, I'd really appreciate it. And Monica, why don't you start?
I would say until things pay equity is achieved, remember that your career is in your hands, and to ensure that you gather as much information as you can about your next career move and your jobs, but also build that network, have those conversations, be willing to provide your data and share information, and be willing to stand up for what you believe in and what you have discovered or uncovered of what those pay bands are, and be willing to walk away sometimes if a company's not willing to meet that.
Thank you. And Monique, not Monica, I'm sorry. I don't know why when I look at your name, I see, forgive me, please. Okay. And how about you, Christine?
I love what Monique had to say. I was obviously, there's a saying, you don't get what you don't ask for. So, it's if you got to figure out what your priorities are and ask for what you really are really need and really require. And ultimately, you have to decide if, you want to stay with that employer, if you want to leave, if you want to file a complaint. Everybody has to figure out what their own personal circumstances allow for, obviously. But ultimately, things don't change unless there's some individual who's willing to stand up and say, enough, I'm not going to take this anymore. There are things we can do about this, whether it's organizing within the company. There's been employee walkouts at some companies to protest their policies, or whether it's taking legal action. If you don't get what, the treatment you deserve by, automatically or after you ask for it, then at that point you really have to make a decision about what you want to do and what you want to stand for.
Thank you. And Dr. Hill.
Well, yes, I would just echo the idea that we should be demanding accountability. We should be demanding transparency. We should be arming ourselves with information, and you should be willing to stay or you should be willing to leave, depending on your circumstances. But I just want to add one thing for those of you who are working in here today, and you're gathering knowledge and you're making decisions about what to say, what to do to move your employer to where you have the right to be. And that is, don't forget that there is someone in your organization that is even more vulnerable than you are, that does not have that information, that cannot at this point find the resources, emotional or economic or whatever they need to move forward or to even get the information that you have. So don't forget that you make these moves, you advocate for the change, not simply for yourself, but for others that are more vulnerable who cannot advocate for themselves at this moment.
And that is an amazing, thank you for that, because that is so important. And I think if you're looking, audience, at these faces on the screen, you're seeing champions who've done just that. And I just want to say thank you for blazing the way for all of us, for giving us the courage and the information we need to step in and do our part. I'm so grateful personally. So I just want to thank everyone again for tuning in to this edition of Elevating Conversations presented by AnitaB.org. We appreciate the continued support of every one of you. Please remember to visit the resources page on AnitaB.org's membership site for more useful information, legal resources, and actions you can take to help address and mitigate pay discrimination. If you enjoyed today's discussion, we invite you to visit ghc.AnitaB.org for more information on this year's annual Grace Hopper celebration, the world's largest gathering of women and non-binary technologists, which will be held September 20 through 23rd in Orlando, Florida. While we realize the Don't Say Gay bill goes into effect on July 1, we want our attendees to know that we are committed to creating a safe place where all are welcomed. We are intentionally working to cultivate long-lasting relationships with those on the ground in Florida who stand for equality, equity, and justice. So we invite you to come and stand with us and lift up your voices. Be sure to look out for our next Elevating Conversations event via our newsletter and follow us on social media at AnitaB_org to be among the first to know all the details. Until next time, I'm Brenda Darden Wilkerson, President and CEO of AnitaB.org, and we'll see you real soon. Bye now.